How do we pick romantic partners? In today's modern world, many of us would probably like to think that because we have been freed from the restrictions of past traditions, we can now rely on our own unique preferences and individual priorities when we pick a partner. Yet one only needs to look around to know that while there are certainly exceptions, the general trend seems to be that people who are similar to others in various ways tend to end up in the same partnerships. This phenomenon, in which people marry others from the same social groups, is known as endogamy, or marrying into the same group. Often this is in terms of race, but it just as easily tends to occur along a range of other social identities including age, education, political affiliation, religion, and so on. There are at least three primary mechanisms by which endogamy tends to occur. Structurally induced endogamy happens simply because of the environments in which we operate. In other words, the spaces or environments we occupy function as structures that constrain the kinds of people we meet and interact with, including how homogeneous or diverse they are, and consequently the range of prospective partners we have to choose from. And so, the more segregated and therefore internally homogeneous our environments, the less diverse or homogeneous the dating and marrying pool is, and the more endogamy we would expect. What does one's environment refer to? On the one hand, it refers to the physical spaces we occupy, such as the communities we live in or the places in which we work. But it also extends to the social groups in which we spend much of our time, which often intersect with our physical environments, but not always. Thus, in a neighborhood that is largely comprised of a single race, we would expect a lot of intra-racial relationships. In a workplace environment, or occupation more broadly, where people are of the same education, we would expect a lot of relationships between people of the same or similar educational level, if not occupation itself. In a social club comprised of people doing the same things, whether it is cycling, playing board games, hiking, or dancing, we might also expect pairings of people who, unsurprisingly, share these same interests. The second mechanism is through personal choice. When it comes to who we spend time with, the tendency among human beings is to associate with those who are like them, a process known as homophily. This theory argues that one of the main reasons we see relationships of people who tend to be similar to their partners, whether by race or religion or education, is simply due to the phenomenon of homophily. That is, as individuals we tend to pick people who are like us. Why do we do it? There are many possible reasons, but one reason is that we tend to feel more comfortable among people who are like us. This is why men and women tend to, though not always, form and maintain platonic relationships with people of the same sex. Largely because people of the same sex tend to have been socialized in the same ways from a young age. They tend to share similar interests, commiserate of the same or similar gender or sex-related issues, and speak the same social language, for instance, having the same slang or sharing the same boundaries about what is and isn't appropriate to speak of. Finally, the theory of market competition focuses on how forming relationships occur within a sort of mating market, in which certain characteristics are higher on a hierarchy of desirable traits than others. In other words, certain characteristics associated with things like race or education or income may be seen as being more desirable than others. In theory, market competition approaches would suggest not endogamy, but hypergamy, in which people strive for those who have the highest status, whether that is by race, education, age, income, and so on. However, there are many, but only so many, who are at the top of the racial hierarchy, white in many places, the most educated, at the most healthy and generally physically attractive age, and the wealthiest. As such, in a competitive market, most of us end up having to settle, which, according to this theory, will end up contributing to endogamy despite people's preferences for higher status characteristics in their partner. For instance, although we might all ideally like a partner who is physically attractive, our own relatively lower physical attractiveness, at least as defined by society, may prevent us from getting that match. Although we might all like to marry someone wealthy, that wealthy person may not want to marry down, so to speak, and may instead pick someone who is of comparable wealth. Another alternative, however, is that market competition might force us to make trade-offs. For instance, men have had a long tendency of marrying younger women, trading their generally higher incomes and occupational status in exchange for pairing with someone who is at what society has deemed a more desirable age. Likewise, women in those situations may, according to this theoretical approach, be trading their youthful looks and health for the benefits of marrying someone wealthy and or famous. In a different example, someone who is of a minority race or ethnicity that is undervalued in society might marry someone who is white, assuming this is the US or some other Western country, by trading their own higher education, for example, for their partner's higher racial status. In this lecture, we have talked about 3 theories that can explain how endogamy happens. The first is that homogeneous environments structurally induce endogamy by limiting our options of potential partners. Second, endogamy happens through personal preferences for people who are like us. And third, in a world where we have to compete with many others to find a marital partner, we end up pairing with people who are like us not because we ideally want to, but because the higher status traits we do want in our partner are difficult to attain in this sea of competition. Alternatively, someone focusing on marketing dynamics might argue for a more complex situation in which competition does produce endogamy, but in various situations may actually also produce a combination of status characteristics between partners. This occurs, for instance, when one partner trades on their higher status in one respect or dimension in exchange for their partner's higher status in another respect or dimension.